I hope I am sharing my story in the right group because I really need advice about my current situation. My wife, Krista, and I have been married for quite a long time, and together we have two children, Robert and Diana. Robert, our eldest, was our only child for many years until Krista unexpectedly became pregnant again with Diana. Although we initially wanted just one child, we were grateful for the blessing of our second. I love both of my children equally and have always worked hard to provide them with everything they could ever want. When Robert was born, Christy and I were just 2 years into our marriage. I was over the moon with excitement at the prospect of meeting my little buddy. The day he was born is etched in my memory. My hands trembled as I held him for the first time, tears of joy streaming down my face as I realized he was my son. During the first few months after his birth, Christ was frequently in and out of the hospital due to health issues, which meant I spent a lot of time caring for Robert on my own. Whenever Christ was home, I made sure she could rest as much as possible, taking on the child care duties entirely myself. Fortunately, owning my own company allowed me the flexibility to work from home most of the time, enabling me to be a full-time parent while Christ recovered. Because of the extensive time Robert and I spent together during his early years, we developed a very close bond. I was there for all his milestones, his first steps, his first fall off his bike while learning to ride, and I taught him how to play basketball. Every Sunday afternoon, we would practice or shoot hoops together. At night, we would snuggle up on the couch and watch movies. This closeness was evident, and although Christy sometimes complained about it, my son was never disrespectful to her. He simply didn't spend as much time with her. I often encouraged Christ to spend one-on-one time with Robert, suggesting outings for ice cream or drives where they could talk and connect. However, she always seemed uncertain about how to bond with him and often asked me to join them. I am sure Robert sensed this gap in their relationship, though he never mentioned it to me. When Christ became pregnant with Diana, it was a surprise. We were both nervous, considering her previous health issues, but the doctors assured us there would be no complications this time. Christy had always expressed her desire for a mini version of herself, and she got her wish with Diana. Our daughter inherited Christy's blue eyes and my blonde hair, and things were much easier for us the second time around. We learned from our previous mistakes and did not stress as much as we did when we had Robert. People often say they don't care about the gender of their baby, but after having both a son and a daughter, I can genuinely say my heart never felt so tender until Diana was born. As a father, holding your daughter for the first time ignites a feeling that you would do anything for her. From that moment on, I felt like I could move mountains just to keep her safe and warm. Daughters have a profound way of changing a man. With my son, I was more carefree, but with my daughter, I became careful and protective, not wanting anyone to harm my baby girl. Both Christ and I were a bit anxious during our second pregnancy, because we hoped Robert and Diana would get along despite the 8.5-year age gap between them, which can be significant. Fortunately, things worked out wonderfully. Robert was a fantastic older brother to Diana from the start. He would lovingly stay close to her, watching her sleep, and play with her when she was awake. My son was very attentive to his baby sister from the beginning, and I am proud to say that both my children have always been very close to each other. This is exactly what every parent wishes for, having siblings as best friends. Now that I have shared about my children, I would like to elaborate more on my marriage. Christy and I met in college. I was a nerd, and as the child of immigrants, I had clear goals I wanted to achieve after college. I watched my parents work hard all their lives, and I aspired to start my own company and earn enough to give them everything they ever wanted. Christ, on the other hand, had a much easier life. She came from an upper-middle-class family and didn't have to worry about money. I first saw Christ at a party where she was blackout drunk, partying with her friends. She was beautiful, and I knew she was out of my league, so I didn't even try to strike up a conversation with her. However, the next time we met at a party, Christ approached me and asked me to dance with her. Being a nerdy kid, I didn't have any impressive dance moves, so we mostly just shuffled around and giggled. Christ was smart, confident, and an extrovert who had no qualms about expressing herself in front of an audience. Despite the signals Christ gave me to ask her out, I was still unsure about us. It wasn't just my lack of confidence back then, it was also because Christ partied a lot. She could party until the sun came up and was always surrounded by her friends. This lifestyle made me hesitant about pursuing a relationship with her, even though I was deeply attracted to her. Over time, however, Christy and I grew closer, and our differences began to complement each other. While she brought fun and spontaneity into my life, I provided stability and a clear vision for our future. Our bond strengthened, and we eventually got married. Looking back, I am grateful for how our relationship has evolved and for the family we have built together. I've always been the kind of person who doesn't date casually, so I chose not to ask her out, knowing it would be a waste of time for both of us. However, Chrissy is not someone who can be easily ignored or deterred. After our fourth or fifth meeting at a party, she finally confronted me about my reluctance to go out with her. I told her the truth, which she did not appreciate. She insisted that I needed to loosen up and enjoy college life instead of spending all my time in the library. There was something about Chrissy that resonated with me. Her points about living life one day at a time were valid and struck a chord with me. Recognizing our mutual attraction, I eventually asked her out, and the rest is history. Chrissy and I have faced challenges, particularly regarding her drinking problem, but we've never broken up. To be completely transparent for the sake of this story, my wife becomes a different person when she is completely drunk. Initially, with a few drinks, she remains her sweet self, but after 5 or 6 drinks, she turns nasty to those around her. In college, people even nicknamed her Miss Jacqueline Hyde for fun, because it was like she had a completely different personality when drunk. I remember the first time I saw this other side of her. We were all at a bar celebrating our 21st birthdays at a cheap place offering 25% off drinks between 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock p.m. Everyone was having a good time, and Chrissy got very drunk. On her way back from the restroom, she bumped into a server, causing drinks to spill on her dress. We all saw the incident, and I rushed over to help her, but before I could reach her, Chrissy started screaming and pulling the server's hair. I was stunned, watching her publicly embarrass herself by shouting curses at the poor server, who looked horrified and kept apologizing. In the end, the manager asked us to leave because Chrissy wouldn't stop causing a scene. I did my best to calm her down, but her friends kept encouraging her and escalating the situation, even when she was clearly in the wrong. When the manager tried to remove us, her friends refused to leave and started threatening him loudly. One of them even smashed a glass on the floor, which was terrifying. I quickly realized that if this continued, the manager would call the police. I had never been in trouble before and wasn't about to start that night, so I settled our bill separately with the manager and got ready to leave. Despite my efforts to reason with Chrissy, she insisted she was right and refused to leave until the server paid for her dry cleaning. Fortunately, I left in time because shortly afterwards, the police were called and the entire group was arrested. They had to call their parents to bail them out. Everyone was understandably upset with me for avoiding the situation. Some even texted me, calling me disloyal and saying they didn't want to invite me to their parties anymore. Honestly, I was okay with that because I didn't want to be associated with people who got into legal trouble. Over time, Chrissy and I worked through many of these issues. Her drinking became less of a problem as she matured, and our relationship grew stronger as we faced challenges together. My initial reluctance to ask her out was replaced by a deep commitment to making our relationship work, despite the obstacles. We found a balance, and the qualities that initially drew me to her, her confidence, extroversion, and ability to live in the moment, became assets in our life together. Reflecting on our journey, I realized that the experiences we shared, both good and bad, have shaped the strong bond we have today. However, Chrissy was not pleased with how things turned out. She wanted to apologize to her friends and insisted that we should support each other and stick together in such situations. I had to explain firmly that, unlike her family, my parents would not tolerate such behavior. They would be furious if I ever needed them to bail me out of jail. Chrissy struggled to understand this due to her different upbringing. Eventually, she had to accept that I wasn't going to make amends with her friends. If she wanted to spend time with them, she would have to do so without me. Since that incident, I have shown no interest in hanging out with her friends and did not attend any of their parties, even if Chrissy wanted me to come along. Instead, I focused on working towards my goals and planning my career. Meanwhile, Chrissy and her friends occasionally continued to get into trouble with the law, but their parents had good lawyers, so nothing went on their official records. After we graduated, Chrissy gradually realized that the same friends who liked to hang out all day were now too busy with their own lives and were drifting apart, wanting nothing to do with each other. This is a normal part of adulthood, but it was a harsh reality for her to swallow. When I secured a job in another city and had to move away, she decided to move in with me. I never expected us to move in together so soon after college, but Chrissy was insistent that she would be an ideal roommate. She believed that moving in with me would help her focus on finding a job and becoming more serious about her future. However, during the first 6 months of living together, it was a struggle for me to pay both our bills and rent, as she didn't contribute financially. The only thing I asked her to do was cook, but even that seemed too much for her. She would spend hours sitting on the sofa, watching TikTok. Whenever I encouraged her to go out to the park or the gym, she would talk about feeling depressed. It was only after I had a serious conversation with her about the financial strain I was under that Chrissy finally understood the extent of my responsibilities. She started applying for jobs and eventually landed a position at a digital marketing company that suited her skills. I was relieved to have a partner who was contributing financially, which alleviated my money worries. However, Chrissy also loved to splurge money as soon as she earned it, which wasn't much to begin with. She would buy perfumes and makeup every time she was bored and had a phone in her hand. The number of boxes that arrived at our door, all for her, was countless. This behavior raised a red flag for me because, while we were living together and likely heading towards marriage, I wanted a partner who would also save for our future. Despite these challenges, I saw potential in our relationship and hoped we could work through these issues together. Chrissy's spending habits needed to change, and I was determined to help her see the importance of financial responsibility. I believe that with time, patience, and honest communication, we could build a stable and prosperous life together. So we continued to navigate our early adult life, learning and growing from our experiences and hoping for a brighter future. While I was diligently investing my money and saving for a house, Chrissy seemed to have no concrete plans for her financial future. I knew I couldn't force her to change. She needed to come to that realization on her own, so I remained silent no matter how extravagant her purchases became. I remember one particular birthday when I had saved enough to buy a car for myself. It was a significant investment, and I felt proud of my achievement. Chrissy was shocked to see that I had saved enough to make such a purchase and demanded to check my account. She couldn't believe how much money I had saved. I think seeing me make such a substantial purchase made her realize that she needed to step up her financial game. She finally started discussing with me the idea of investing her money each month, which was a pleasant surprise. She stopped making unnecessary purchases and learned to save her paychecks every month. It was only after witnessing this positive change in her that I decided to propose. At the time, I had a stable job, but my ultimate goal was to start my own business before we started a family. Hence, after our engagement, I left my job to focus on building my company. I am incredibly grateful that my wife stood by me during those challenging early days when I was working tirelessly to get my business off the ground. Although I had saved enough money to avoid relying on her financially, those days were incredibly emotionally frustrating, and I needed her unwavering support more than ever. Starting a business isn't easy, and it requires a lot of dedication. Being a perfectionist, it was particularly challenging for me to learn how to manage and delegate tasks effectively to my team in order to grow my business. Chrissy and I got married only after I had successfully built the foundation of my business, as I wanted to ensure I could provide for her. Over the past 28 years, my business has expanded and grown significantly. I earn well thanks to my business, and I have fulfilled my dream of providing my parents with a comfortable life. Chrissy was also able to leave her job to become a stay-at-home mother. I would say neither of us had any major issues in our relationship, or so I thought until today. After the children grew up, Chrissy spent most of her time with her friends or at the gym. We go out on dates every Friday and still maintain a very intimate relationship with each other. Our children have grown up seeing us affectionate with each other, and they quickly became accustomed to it. In our family, we never had any major fights. However, one night, we had an incident that changed everything for us. During this time, Robert was a teenager and, like any other teenager, had his typical mood swings. He stopped hanging out with me like he usually did, preferring to spend time with his friends or in his room listening to music. I felt sad that my little boy was growing up, but I didn't mind and always reminded him that I was there for him whenever he needed me. On the other hand, my daughter, being 8 years younger than him, was still a child and still needed me. Unlike my teenage son, Diana would rush to greet me as soon as I came home from work. I cherished the way her eyes would light up whenever she saw me holding a teddy bear or flowers behind my back to surprise her. I guess you could say that Robert might have been a bit jealous that I spent most of my time and attention on Diana after work. This jealousy eventually led to an outburst one evening, which brought to light the underlying tensions in our family dynamics. Robert accused me of favoring Diana and neglecting him. This confrontation forced us to address the issues we had been ignoring. Chrissy and I had to find a way to reassure both our children that they were equally loved and valued, despite the differences in their stages of life. Through open communication and spending quality time with both Robert and Diana, we worked to mend our family bonds and ensure that both our children felt secure and cherished. It was never my intention to exclude Robert because I always tried to include him as much as possible. However, I think another issue was his relationship with his mother. She didn't hesitate to show favoritism towards our daughter, often pointing out how similar Diana was to her. Sometimes I would privately urge her to spend more time with Robert, but she would always dismiss my concerns, telling me that he probably just needed his space and I was overthinking things. I don't know what issues she had with our son, but she never gave him any time of day. When they did talk, it was always just small talk. Hence, it did not come as a surprise to me when Robert started to rebel. Slowly, it began with him talking back to his mother, but it escalated when he started sneaking out at night to drink with his friends. One night, he even took my car keys without permission and was caught by the police for driving under the influence. I was shocked to receive a call from the police in the middle of the night informing me about my son's situation. Fortunately, they decided to give him a warning since it was his first offense. I was furious and gave Robert a stern lecture about how he was jeopardizing his future. I expected my wife to support me, but instead she defended Robert, saying that young people needed to have fun sometimes, and that what he was doing wasn't much different from what she had done herself. I was shocked because this was not something I wanted our son to hear. That night marked the first major fight in our family, as it felt like she was reverting to her irresponsible self from her college years. I felt I had to step up as a parent because she seemed to condone our son's irresponsible behavior, thinking it reminded her of her own past. Robert, on the other hand, did not care and told me that he just wanted to be alone. I tried to encourage him to go for therapy, but he refused, telling me that he didn't need anybody's help. He continued to be defiant, talking back to us at home. We frequently received complaints from the school about his incomplete assignments and disciplinary issues. It was like he was becoming a completely different person. Whenever I wanted to sit down and talk to him, he would dismiss me or keep quiet the whole time just to avoid any conversation. His behavior started to worry me a lot. During this challenging period, I also had to travel extensively for work, as I was in the process of expanding my business. Looking back, I realized I might have neglected my responsibilities as a father. Perhaps I should have made more effort to talk to my son, even though he was pushing me away. I wish I could have held on to my son and taken away whatever it was that was troubling him. One day, it all came to a head when I returned home from one of my work trips to hear my wife and son screaming at each other. As I entered the kitchen, I found broken glasses and plates strewn across the floor. My son was facing my wife, yelling about how much he hated her. Instinctively, I positioned myself between them to protect my wife, because I did not like the way my son was screaming at her. Upon seeing me, my son redirected his anger towards me, accusing me of being a coward and yelling at me for being a deadbeat. That moment was a turning point for our family. I realized that our issues were far deeper than I had understood, and it was crucial for us to address them together. We had to find a way to heal and rebuild our relationships, not just as parents, but as a united family. This incident made it clear that we needed professional help and open, honest communication to move forward. The outburst from my son deeply shook me. I tried to calm him down and ask my wife what had happened, but he continued shouting, insisting that our marriage was a sham and accusing us of lying to him his entire life. Confusion clouded my thoughts as I struggled to comprehend what he was insinuating. My wife sternly intervened, reprimanding him for discussing our marriage and reminding him that he was too young to make such accusations. My son argued back, expressing his disgust with us and declaring that he did not want to live with us anymore. I was at a loss to understand what could have triggered such a reaction, but he refused to explain himself. Frustrated by his behavior, I demanded that he apologize to his mother for the hurtful names he called her. He scoffed at me and adamantly refused, insisting that he meant every word and expressing how sick he was of pretending that we were a perfect family. I tried to reason with him, reminding him that no family is flawless and that name-calling wouldn't solve anything. However, he lashed out, blaming me for everything and even claiming that I didn't deserve to have children. His words cut deep, and I was taken aback by what he had spoken. In a fit of anger, I did the unthinkable. I slapped my son. I deeply regretted my actions the moment my hand connected with his cheek. The room fell silent as shock registered on everyone's faces. My son staggered back, clutching his cheek in disbelief, while my wife gasped audibly, her eyes wide with horror. I had never laid a hand on my children before, and the realization of what I had done hit me like a ton of bricks. Guilt and shame flooded over me as I stepped back, unable to comprehend my own behavior. My son's stunned expression turned into a mix of anger and hurt, and I could see tears welling up in his eyes. Without a word, he ran upstairs, leaving my wife and me standing in stunned silence. She approached me and offered a half-hearted hug, murmuring that it would be okay and suggesting that I apologize to him later. I stood there, my hand trembling, realizing the damage I'd caused to our family. About an hour later, as I helped my wife clean up the kitchen, the doorbell rang. Before I could reach the door, my son hurried downstairs to answer it. It was his grandparents, my wife's parents, whom he had called to come and take him with them. They were already aware of the incident, and, while they understood the situation, they reprimanded me for my actions. I attempted to apologize to my son in an effort to mend things, but he ignored me as if I didn't exist. He had packed his bags and went away to live with his grandparents. He didn't even stay to say goodbye to Diana, who was at a friend's place celebrating her birthday at that time. Initially, we hoped this move would be temporary, but Robert eventually made it clear he had no intention of returning home. After that incident, I did everything humanly possible to seek his forgiveness. I apologized daily, attempted conversations when visiting his grandparents' place, where he often locked himself in his room, and sent countless texts pleading for communication. Despite my efforts, my son ceased all contact with me. The only ongoing expectation was to financially support his education while he lived with his grandparents. I also talked to my wife regarding the incident, and she explained that Robert and she had an argument about his homework that escalated quickly. At that moment, I had no reason to doubt her account, especially considering Robert's previous behavioral patterns. For a long time, I believed that my son's apparent hatred and abandonment were solely because of that one incident. When my son got into college with a full scholarship, I couldn't have been prouder of him. I sent him a text congratulating him and expressing how proud I was. I ended the message with another apology. However, he responded with a long text asking me to stop sending him these messages and stating that I was no longer his father. His words echoed the painful memory of that night when he called me a deadbeat father. Despite all my efforts to reconcile with him, I had apologized countless times for that one slap, and if my son continued to hold such resentment towards me, I felt there was nothing more I could do to repair our relationship. That conversation marked the last time we spoke. These past 5 years, I've deeply missed my son a lot and think about him all the time. Despite no communication with me, he has maintained a steadfast relationship with our daughter. Diana sometimes updates me and my wife about our son, but mostly we avoid discussing his name because it's too painful. Diana knows about that fateful night and the incident where I slapped her brother. Although she was disappointed in me, she does understand the depth of my remorse for that action. Yesterday, on her birthday, Diana expressed her wish to spend the entire day with our son at the adventure park. I was genuinely happy for her and hoped that they would have a wonderful time together. When Diana returned home late that night, she appeared disturbed. While Chrissy had already fallen asleep, I stayed awake to ensure our daughter returned safely. I also hoped to catch sight of our son in case he accompanied her back. When I asked her about her day, Diana shook her head, looking concerned. I inquired if something had happened to her. It was then that my daughter asked me if I knew the real reason why Robert had left that night. Confused, I listened intently as she prepared to reveal what she had learned. I asked Diana what she meant, but she only told me that Robert misses me, even if he would never admit it. She shared that he had confided something troubling in her, something she found hard to believe. When I pressed her for details, Diana suggested that I check the emails Robert had apparently sent me years ago. Initially, I thought my daughter might have misunderstood Robert because if he had ever sent me emails, I would have undoubtedly responded to them. Checking my Gmail, I found no emails from Robert. Puzzled, I wondered why he would tell Diana he had emailed me if he hadn't. Then, I recalled an old email address I hadn't used in years, one I had created for my Facebook account. Though it had been a long time since I accessed it, I decided it might be worth logging in to check for any emails from my son. Despite forgetting my password, I managed to recover the account successfully. Imagine my shock when I discovered several emails from Robert, sent over the years, just waiting to be opened in my inbox. I began reading through the emails and soon realized that my son had sent me messages every time he was having a difficult day. Tears welled up in my eyes as I went through his words. In his recent emails, he expressed more and more regret about not opening up to me sooner about the real reason he left that night. In one email, Robert recounted the night he had argued with my wife. He described coming home from school to find her in bed with someone else. Naturally, he was furious and started to yell at her. In response, she threatened him, insisting he keep the secret to himself and warning him that revealing it could lead to our divorce. She also told him that I had supposedly been cheating on her during my work trips and that we had an open marriage. This revelation utterly disgusted our son, leading him to call me all those names, believing his mother's accusations were true. It wasn't until years later, when he started going to therapy, that he realized how his mother had manipulated him. By staying connected with Diana, he gradually understood that our marriage was never open and that his mother had been the one cheating behind my back. He ended the email by expressing how he didn't have the courage to face me, knowing that he had walked out on the family and mistreated me for years. As I read his email, a rush of shock and sadness hit me like a punch to the gut. The truth my son had been holding on to all these years was overwhelming. I felt betrayed and angry, realizing that my wife had been cheating on me all this time, and I had been completely unaware. My life feels like it has fallen apart. What should I do? Should I confront my wife about this, even though I don't have any proof? What if she denies it, especially since she rarely admits to any mistakes? Update 1. Hello everyone. It's been a week since I last updated. To quickly bring you up to speed, I confronted my wife, pressing her for details despite her initial denials. Finally, she broke down in tears and confessed everything. She admitted to having an affair years ago, during the time when Robert was a teenager, and recounted the same details that Robert had shared with me in his email. She confessed that she was afraid of losing me, hence she had made up the lie about us having an open marriage just to shut Robert up. She went on to explain how she convinced our son to keep the secret, but he was furious at both of us, which led to that confrontation that night. She never revealed the man's identity to me, but honestly, I didn't care at that point. I could not believe that my wife had not only lied to our son, costing me a relationship with him for all these years, but had also never confessed her affair to me until I found out from my son's emails. During our argument, she also admitted that she had never liked our son because she had always wanted daughters. She added that this was perhaps another reason why she could never bond with him. After this, I could not even look at her face without seeing red. I had no doubts in my mind as I informed my wife that our marriage was over and asked her to move out immediately, despite her pleas for reconsideration. Diana seemed to already know about the affair, and after witnessing our fight, her suspicions were confirmed further. She was understandably furious with her mother and refused to talk to her. I also reached out to Robert during this week, seeking to clarify this matter further. At first, his responses were guarded, but as I broke down and expressed how much I missed him, he too became emotional. He admitted regret for leaving home that night and wished he could turn back time and apologize to me instead. I feel terribly sorry for my son. I still can't believe how my wife manipulated the entire situation just to hide her affair. Both of my children agree with my decision to divorce my wife and want nothing to do with her. I now finally understand why my wife never missed our son as much as I did all these years, and why she never tried to contact him after he moved out. Whenever I would bring up that night, she would always blame me for slapping him and make me feel guilty for years. I wish I knew then what I know now. I hate my wife so much.